Hey guys, and welcome back. Go ahead and dim the lights, get comfortable, and find that perfect spot on your pillow. Tonight, we're not diving into the dusty annals of medieval Europe or the bizarre family trees of forgotten dynasties. Instead, we're looking at a more modern kind of royalty, the royalty of wealth, and the strange, sad kingdoms they build for themselves. Our story tonight begins with a man named Julius. And Julius, by every modern definition, was a titan. A billionaire businessman who had clawed his way up from nothing, building an empire that stretched across industries. He was the kind of man who thought in terms of logistics, of supply chains, of quarterly reports and market fluctuations. His entire life had been a masterclass in tireless work, a long, grueling ascent to the very pinnacle of success. He had wealth, luxury, comfort, all the things the world tells you are supposed to make you happy. But an empire needs heirs. And Julius had a family. He had a wife, Monica, a daughter, Angela, and a son, Charles. He had spent his entire life working, sacrificing, and building, all to give them the very best of everything. He paved their world in gold, cushioned it with silk, and made sure no hardship, no struggle, no inkling of the real world could ever touch them. He thought he was giving them a gift. As it turns out, he was building a gilded cage for himself and populating it with strangers. It all came to a head, as these things often do, with a sudden, violent jolt of reality. Julius was in his private jet, soaring above the clouds, probably contemplating stock options or a new acquisition. Then something went wrong. The specifics don't matter much. What matters is that the jet came down. Not in a gentle glide, but in a crash that left the machine a twisted wreck, and Julius fighting for his life. He was rushed to the hospital, a symphony of sirens and frantic medical professionals. He lay there, unconscious, while doctors and nurses fought desperately to keep him tethered to this world. While he was in that vulnerable, silent space between life and what comes after, his family began to arrive. Or at least some of them did. His daughter, Angela, walked in first. She looked at her father, lying there, almost lifeless, hooked up to a constellation of beeping machines. A daughter seeing her father on the brink. You'd expect worry, perhaps, tears, a frantic call to a loved one. But Angela's first words were a masterclass in breathtaking self-absorption. "Dad," she said, though he couldn't hear her, "I hope the jet didn't crash too badly. I need it for my Dubai vacation next week." Because, naturally, when your father is potentially on death's door, the primary concern is the structural integrity of the jet you need for your vacation. It's just logical, isn't it? Then there was the son, Charles, a true visionary in the field of doing absolutely nothing. He didn't even show up. Not a text, not a call. He was otherwise engaged, you see, tending to his girlfriend who was suffering from menstrual cramps. A noble, if not exactly heroic, reason to miss your father's brush with the afterlife. One imagines the dramatic text exchange. "Dad might be dying. Yeah, but Becky's tummy hurts." The decision clearly made itself. And finally, his wife, Monica. She barely reacted. No panic, no visible concern, just a quiet, unnerving silence. A distance that felt colder and more final than any outburst ever could. She stood there as if she were waiting for a bus, not watching the potential end of her husband's life. That was the moment everything became clear to Julius, even in his unconscious state. Or perhaps it was the moment he started to wake up, in more ways than one. He had built an empire for them. He had given them a life free from the very work that had defined his own. And in doing so, he had created people who had learned nothing about value, about effort, or about love. All they did was spend. Designer clothes, exotic travel, luxury cars, a never-ending carousel of consumption. Not a single one of them had ever truly earned the thing. As he lay in that hospital bed, betrayed not by business rivals or strangers, but by the very people he loved the most, Julius knew something had to change. He had built a financial empire for his family, but now he realized with a soul-crushing certainty that he needed to rebuild their values before it was too late. He had given them the world, but he had forgotten to give them a soul. Days turned into weeks. Julius remained in the hospital. He recovered, but slowly. And through it all, his family was a ghost. No one stayed by his side. No one held his hand through the long, quiet nights. The only visits he got were transactional. Angela came, not to ask how he was, but to ask for funds to go shopping. Monica came, not to check on his breathing, but to ask about the family accounts and the business shares. And Charles never even called. And so as he stared at the bleak white tiles of the hospital ceiling one morning, something inside him didn't just break, it calcified. He knew what he had to do. He called the doctor to his bedside. His voice was weak, but the words were steady. "Tell them that I've gone blind," he said. The doctor, a man of science and reason, froze. Are you sure, sir?" he stammered. "Yes," Julius said, his voice as firm as it had ever been in the boardroom. "Let them believe I can't see anything anymore." The doctor was speechless, of course. This wasn't in any medical textbook, but he nodded. When the news was broken to the family, there was a pause. A brief, flickering moment where one might have hoped for a gasp of horror, for a cry of, "Oh, my poor husband, my poor father!" But instead, after the silence, came a single, chilling question from his wife Monica. "Will this affect the company's money?" "No," the doctor replied. "Then we'll manage," she said. And in that moment, Julius felt the last ember of his hope for them die. After he was discharged, Julius returned to his mansion. He wore dark sunglasses and carried a walking stick. He made a show of pretending to stumble a little at the door, a blind man re-entering a world he could no longer see. None of his family rushed to hug him or welcome him back. Only the housekeepers, the paid staff, came to help him inside, gently guiding him to a chair. Monica barely glanced at him. Angela kept scrolling on her phone, and Charles, predictably, was nowhere to be found. Days passed. It was a silent, cruel experiment. Nobody asked how he was doing. Nobody offered to help him walk from one room to another. Nobody cared. But they all remembered where he was when they needed something. "Dad, I need money for my birthday party," Angela would say to the man in the chair. "Julius, we need to make some changes to the business accounts," Monica would demand, not of her partner, but of her financial instrument. No one talked about how he would manage the company now that he was blind. No one asked if he needed help navigating the house that he had built for them. They simply left him in his chair, a silent, sightless monument to their indifference.
Weeks had passed since Julius
But
returned
Julius had
home,
more plans.
playing the part
This,
of the blind
he knew,
patriarch.
was only the beginning.
house still echoed with the same careless energy, laughter, loud music, and the constant casual demands for money, for trips, for parties. No one knew that behind those dark sunglasses, Julius was seeing everything more clearly than he ever had before. He was an anthropologist in his own home, studying a strange and heartless tribe that he himself had created. He saw the way they barely acknowledged him, the way they talked around him as if he were a piece of furniture, the way their entire existence revolved around the next purchase, the next thrill, the next validation of their wealth. One morning, before the sun had even thought about rising, Julius picked up his phone. The screen cast a faint glow on his face in the pre-dawn darkness. He dialed a number he knew by heart, the number of the one person in his vast empire he still trusted completely, his personal assistant, Leo. Leo had worked for Julius for over a decade. He was loyal, efficient, and had seen Julius at his most powerful and his most vulnerable. But he had never heard his boss sound like this. His voice was quiet, cold and utterly devoid of emotion. "Leo," Julius said, his voice barely a whisper, "I need you to do something." "Of course, sir. Anything." Leo's reply was immediate, as always. "Transfer all the company's funds into a private account, every last cent." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Leo, a man who understood finance better than anyone, knew exactly what this meant. "Sir," he said carefully, "that would make the company look like it's gone bankrupt." "Exactly," Julius said. The word hung in the air, sharp and final. "And make sure no one finds out, not even the board." Another long pause. Leo was processing the sheer scale of the command, the beautiful, terrifying simplicity of it. He was being asked to dismantle an empire overnight, to make a giant of industry vanish into thin air. Then his voice came back, just as steady as his boss's. "Yes, sir." A few hours later, as the sun began to filter through the windows of his mansion, Julius made another call. This time it was to his personal bank manager. His instructions were even simpler. "Block every card under my family's name," he instructed. "Freeze their accounts now." And just like that, with 2 quiet phone calls, the world changed. The first tremors were felt at the airport. Angela and Monica, blissfully unaware, were ready for another jaunt. Paris this time, not Dubai, because when you're that wealthy, the destinations are interchangeable. Angela, clad in a shiny designer tracksuit that probably cost more than a small car, handed her credit card to the airline staff to upgrade their tickets. Monica stood beside her, clutching a leather handbag that was, without a doubt, more expensive than most people's cars. The airline staffer swiped the card. A small, polite frown appeared on her face. "Sorry, ma'am, this card has been declined." Angela laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "Try again," she commanded, as if the machine had simply made a foolish error. They tried again. Declined. Monica, with an exasperated sigh, produced her own card. "Try this one." Declined. Angela's voice started to rise, that familiar shrill tone of entitlement being questioned. "What is going on?" she demanded. Monica, ever the pragmatist, was already on her phone calling the bank in a controlled rage. She listened for a moment, her face going from angry to confused to utterly pale. She lowered the phone. "All our accounts. Frozen," she whispered, the words sounding alien in her own mouth. Without another word, they turned around, their Parisian dream evaporating, and stormed back home. Julius was sitting in the living room, his walking stick resting beside him, the picture of serene blindness. He heard the front door burst open and the frantic sound of expensive shoes rushing across the marble floor. "Dad, what is this?" Angela shouted, waving her phone like a weapon. "Our cards aren't working." "Our money's gone," Monica screamed, her usual composure finally cracking. "How could you let this happen?" Before Julius could even pretend to answer, the door slammed open again. It was Charles, sunglasses on, looking angrier than ever. "My crypto investment was supposed to go through today," he yelled as if this were the most pressing issue in the world. "My card is blocked. What the hell is going on?" Julius slowly stood up, making a show of struggling with his walking stick. He let the chaos swirl around him for a moment, savoring the delicious panic. He said, I'm sorry," he said, his voice soft and trembling. "A perfect performance of a broken man. The company, it's gone. Bankrupt. Everything is shutting down." A profound silence fell across the room. The shouting stopped, the frantic energy dissipated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Angela just blinked as if trying to process a foreign language. Monica looked horrified. "This can't be real." Angela, recovering first, threw her hands in the air. Her priorities, as always, were crystal clear. "I don't care about the company, but nothing must happen to my credit card." Charles grabbed a bottle of expensive mineral water from a side table and slammed it down. "This is nonsense. What do you mean the company is bankrupt? Where are we supposed to live?" Julius took another shaky breath. His next words were soft, but they landed like daggers. "They've given us a date to leave this house." "What?" the family shouted in perfect, horrified unison. "They must be joking," Monica snapped. "Leave this mansion? This lifestyle?" Angela scoffed. "You've lost your mind." Charles was now pacing the room, running his hands through his hair. So what now? A hotel? The Ritz? Julius finally looked up, his eyes hidden behind those dark sunglasses, and delivered the final blow. "No," he said gently. "We're going to my maternal home, the village where I grew up." There was another long, crushing silence. Angela stepped back as if she'd been slapped. "You mean the village?" she stammered. Monica's jaw dropped. "With those smelly goats and no air conditioning?" Charles let out a bitter, humorless cackle. "You've gotten mad." They all protested. They yelled. They cursed. They refused. It was unthinkable, impossible, a bad dream. But a few days later, the dream became a reality. A group of men in sharp suits arrived at the mansion. They looked like ordinary businessmen, but their tone was cold and final. "We're here on behalf of the bank," the lead man announced. "This house has been seized due to unpaid debts. Please pack your things and leave immediately." Monica tried to argue, to reason with them, to flash her name around like it was still a magic key. It wasn't. Angela cried, her tears a mixture of fear and fury. Charles cursed them, trying to intimidate them with a bravado he no longer had the financial backing for. They refused to leave, but then the police came. Uniformed officers entered the house, their faces impassive, and began to remove them by force. Angela screamed. Monica begged. Charles fought. None of it mattered. Their world, with its marble floors and high ceilings, was being taken from them. Their designer bags were unceremoniously dumped on the pavement outside the house they once ruled. Julius stood at the gate, quiet and calm amidst the chaos. He watched as the mansion door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing with a beautiful finality. He leaned on his stick, turned his face towards his broken, bewildered family, and said one last thing before turning away.
And
Now,
covered with a
let's
fine
see
layer
what
of
really
dust
matters.
that seemed to seep into everything. The sun had started to set, casting a burnt orange glow over the dry, rolling hills as the old, rusty car rumbled down the broken path. This was not the smooth glide of a limousine on a freshly paved city street. Every pothole was a jarring reminder of how far they had fallen. Charles was behind the wheel, his hands gripping it with white-knuckled anger. He was driving a machine that probably cost less than the tires on his old sports car. Monica and Angela sat in the back, their faces twisted with a potent cocktail of frustration and pure, unadulterated rage. They had found their voices again, and they were using them. "You've ruined our lives, old man," Monica snapped from the back seat, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You blind failure," Angela spat, the words dripping with venom. "You've destroyed everything." Julius sat quietly in the front passenger seat, his sunglasses hiding his eyes, his expression unreadable. He said nothing. He simply let their words hang in the air like poison, listening to the bitter symphony of his own creation. He was the conductor of this miserable orchestra, and for now, he was content to let them play. The car finally pulled up in front of a small, run-down house. That might even be a generous description. It was more of a shack. The roof was bent in several places, the wooden walls were cracked and weathered, and the front yard was just a patch of dry, lifeless dirt. Julius slowly stepped out of the car, using his walking stick to steady himself. "This is the village," he said, pretending to feel the unfamiliar ground with the tip of his stick. "This is where I grew up." Angela looked around, her face a mask of absolute horror. "God forbid I live here," she shouted, her voice echoing in the quiet evening air. "No Wi-Fi? No AC? No internet? Are we animals?" "We have to manage this for now," Julius said, softly, his voice full of a gentle resignation. That was, of course, entirely fake. "Manage what?" Monica hissed, her eyes scanning the pathetic structure. "This trash? You brought us here to die?" The insults didn't stop. They washed over Julius, but he simply turned away and, slowly, methodically, walked toward the house. His stick tapped the dusty ground with every step.
Charles rolled his eyes, muttered a curse under his breath, but followed him. He was angry, but he was also exhausted. Monica and Angela, however, remained outside, their arms folded in a posture of stubborn defiance, refusing to move. But then night fell completely. The mosquitoes came out in humming, hungry clouds, and the wind turned cold. With nowhere else to go, they finally surrendered and entered the house. Their noses wrinkled in unison. The place smelled of old wood, dust, and something vaguely like damp earth. The floor creaked ominously under their expensive and now very dusty shoes. In one corner of the main room sat a weak-looking wooden bed with a thin, torn mattress. Angela stared at it, her eyes wide with horror. "I can't sleep here. This is worse than a nightmare." "Shut up," Monica mumbled, too tired and overwhelmed to fight anymore. They lay down on the single bed, the springs groaning in protest, turning from side to side and whispering complaints, until sheer emotional and physical exhaustion finally dragged them into sleep. Morning came not with the gentle chime of an alarm clock, but with the sound of birds and the distant voices of farmers starting their day. Inside the house, however, there was only a thick, suffocating tension. Smoke rose from a nearby hut where a neighbor was cooking breakfast over an open fire. Julius, ever the helpful guide to their new life, suggested they try the same. The reaction was predictable. "What?" Angela shouted, aghast at the very idea. "Cook with firewood? My hair will smell like smoke. I won't lift a finger," Monica yelled. "This is slavery." And so they refused. They sat there in their dusty designer clothes, expecting something. Expecting perhaps that this was all just a bad joke, that their father would suddenly announce the limo was on its way and their credit cards were working again. But the limo never came. Things only got worse. There was no running water from a tap, only a well outside. There was no electricity at the flick of a switch. There was no refrigerator stocked with fresh food. There was only silence, a gnawing hunger, and the slow, heavy weight of poverty settling upon them like a shroud. The days passed in a miserable, monotonous blur. Angela, driven by a desperation she had never known, began selling her jewelry in the nearby town. A diamond ring here, a gold bracelet there. Monica followed suit, parting with some of her expensive clothes. They used the meager cash to buy basic food, rice, beans, some vegetables, and through it all, Julius said nothing. He sat calmly in a corner, a blind, silent observer, listening to their constant stream of insults. "You're the reason we're suffering," Monica would shout at him, her voice raw with frustration. "You failed as a man. You're a joke," Angela would scream. Still, Julius said nothing. He was letting the pressure build. He knew that true change couldn't be told. It had to be felt. It had to be earned through suffering. One day, Charles came to his father. His eyes were red, not from tears, but from a deep, simmering anger. "I need money," he said, his voice flat. "What for?" Julius asked, playing the part of the helpless blind man. "For my girlfriend. She needs new clothes." Julius just turned his head in the direction of his son's voice. "I have no money, Charles." Charles' face twisted in disbelief. "You don't even have small money for clothes? Useless." He stormed out of the shack, yelling as he went, "I'll work. I'll feed this family myself and leave you to rot." But behind his dark glasses, Julius smiled. A small, silent, satisfied smile. "Good," he whispered to himself. "Let him feel it. Let him learn." The next morning, Charles left the house at dawn. He returned hours later, covered in dirt, his hand sore and blistered, his back aching with a pain he didn't know was possible. Sweat had dried on his face, leaving streaks in the grime. He barely spoke. He just collapsed onto the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. The next day, he could hardly stand up. He cried softly into his pillow, hiding his face from his mother and sister. But hunger doesn't care about pain, so the next day he dragged himself out of bed and went back to the farm, and the day after that, and the day after that. Day after day, the pain became his new normal. Hunger became the enemy, and his pride, once so monumental,
While Charles was
slowly
out
began to
discovering the
fade,
profound
worn
misery of
away by the
manual labor,
harsh reality
Angela and
of
Monica
earning
remained in the
a
shack,
single meal.
which they now just refer to as the prison. They continued selling off the last remnants of their former lives, hoping against hope that each bauble they sold would be the last, that somehow things would magically return to normal. But things only got worse. The well of their possessions was running dry. There were no more rings to sell, no more designer bags to trade for a bag of rice. The hunger was no longer a dull ache, it was a constant, demanding presence. Still, they kept blaming Julius. He was the architect of their suffering, the single point on which they could focus all their rage and despair. "You cursed man," Monica would hiss at him as he sat in his corner, seemingly lost in his world of darkness. "You want to punish us, isn't it?" Angela would snap, her voice sharp with a desperation that was slowly curdling into pure hatred. "You'll regret this." But Julius only sat, calm as ever, blind and silent. He was a rock against which their waves of fury crashed and broke again and again. Angela had nothing left. No more jewelry, no more half-empty perfume bottles to sell, no more makeup kits or designer shoes, just the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. One morning, it growled so loudly it embarrassed her in front of her mother. That was the final indignity. That same day, she swallowed her pride, a bitter, difficult pill, and walked into the small town nearby, asking for work. She found a job at a local eatery. It was a dusty, noisy roadside bar where laborers and farmers ate cheap plates of rice and stew and drank loudly. Her job was simple: serve food, wipe down sticky tables, and smile when needed. The pay was laughably small, and it only came once a week. But to Angela, it was better than starving. It was a lifeline. Each night she would walk the long, dusty road back to the shack, her legs aching, her back hurting, and her heart crying. She would lie down on that hard, lumpy bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, and just burst into tears. It was a quiet, pathetic ritual. Her hands, once soft and perfectly manicured, decorated with expensive rings, were now rough and dry, the nails chipped. She couldn't believe how far she had fallen. "This can't be my life," she'd whisper to the darkness. "Not me." On the 5th night of her new career, just 2 days before she was due to receive her very first, very small paycheck, something terrible happened. She was carrying a plate of hot rice and stew to a customer, her hands trembling from exhaustion. Just a few more steps, and then she slipped. The plate flew from her hands, arcing through the air in a tragic slow-motion ballet of failure. It crashed onto the dirty floor, spilling food everywhere. The sharp sound of breaking ceramic filled the room, and for a moment, everyone stopped talking and turned to look at her. The manager stormed toward her, his face red with anger. "You useless girl, look what you've done. You're clumsy, careless." "I'm sorry," she stammered, tears already welling up in her eyes. The humiliation was overwhelming. "Please forget your pay this week," he yelled, pointing a thick finger at the mess. "You'll pay for that plate." Angela fell to her knees and just cried, right there on the dirty floor. And then, suddenly, a voice rose from a table in the back. "Hey, your face looks familiar." Angela looked up, her vision blurred with tears. Through the haze, she recognized him. "Mr. Nathan," she gasped. It was her father's old friend, a wealthy businessman who had once dined with Julius at fancy restaurants, a man who had seen her at her most polished and privileged. Nathan stood up, his face a mask of shock. "Angela, what are you doing here? Has it really gotten this bad?" Angela could only lower her head in shame, unable to speak. Nathan insisted on driving her home. The ride in his clean, air-conditioned car was quiet and deeply uncomfortable. When they reached the old shack, Nathan stepped out and looked around stunned. This is where you live now?" he asked, his voice full of disbelief. He entered the house and saw Julius sitting quietly in his chair, with his sunglasses on, the very picture of a blind, broken man. "Julius?" Nathan whispered. "I had no idea things were this bad." Julius just gave a soft, sad smile and nodded slowly. Life changes quickly, my friend. They spoke briefly, and when Nathan got up to leave, he handed Monica a small wad of cash. Just a little help, he said kindly. Monica walked him to his car, but she didn't come back right away. Julius, blind in their eyes, sat still inside the house, but his ears were sharp. His heart was watching closely. He listened to the way they spoke in low tones in the car, the long pause, the hushed whispers before she finally returned. Something felt off. From that day on, Nathan became a regular visitor. He always came during the day, always when Angela and Charles were out on their grueling jobs. He would bring small gifts, food items, sometimes more cash, and he would sit in the living room and talk. He said he came to check on his old friend Julius, but Julius knew who he was really there for. It was Monica. They would laugh quietly together, whispering things just out of what they assumed was his earshot. They thought he was blind as well as deaf. Sometimes Julius would ask, "What's that sound?" And Monica would snap back, "Maybe your blindness is affecting your brain now." And from the corner, Julius would hear Nathan smirk. He would feel the slight shift on the old sofa as Nathan touched her thigh, thinking he was unseen. Sometimes Nathan would take Monica out in his car. Julius would hear the engine start and fade into the distance. Hours later, they would return smelling faintly of expensive hotel soap and secrets. Every time, his heart broke a little more, but he said nothing. He watched, he waited, he endured.